What would you do if your entitled neighbor kept stealing your driveway, then called the cops when you dared to fight back, and the police actually sided with her? I'm Marcus, 52, auto mechanic. Just survived a brutal divorce, scraped together every penny for this little ranch house in Ohio. The one thing I loved about this place? That wide driveway, room for my work truck and my Honda. Fourth time this month I drag myself home after fixing school buses for 12 straight hours. My hands still smell like motor oil and transmission fluid. And there it sits, a spotless white BMW planted dead center in my driveway like a middle finger made of German engineering. I'm 20 minutes late for a $300 emergency call, and there's a sticky note on my windshield. Park somewhere else. I'm having guests over. This is a nice neighborhood. The sound of her expensive heels clicking on my pavement as she strutted back inside still makes my blood boil. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done right there, and where are you watching from? I want to see how many countries deal with Karens like this. 6 months ago, I thought I'd escape to paradise when I bought this little ranch house in Millbrook Heights, Ohio. After my divorce cleaned out half my savings, this place was perfect for one reason. That beautiful wide driveway where my F-150 work truck and Honda could both fit with room to spare. When you run honest Marcus Auto Repair and get emergency calls at all hours, quick driveway access isn't luxury, it's survival. The neighborhood felt like a Norman Rockwell painting at first. Quiet cul-de-sac, mature oak trees, the kind of place where people actually wave when they're cutting grass. My next-door neighbor's house was a fancy colonial with its own circular driveway that could park half the block, so I figured everyone had plenty of space. Then I met Brenda Whitmore. Karen, and trust me, she earned that name, is 48 years old, drives a spotless white BMW like it's her throne, and lives in that colonial with her corporate lawyer husband Leonard, who travels constantly. Within a week, I learned she'd appointed herself president of the Neighborhood Standards Committee, which was basically her with expensive wine and a god complex. Every Tuesday and Friday, she'd host these wine parties where women would gather on her deck, sipping Chardonnay and deciding whose lawn wasn't green enough. The sound of their judgment sessions would drift over like mosquitoes buzzing in your ear. Week 2, I came home bone-tired from replacing an engine block all day, my hands still smelling like motor oil in defeat. I turned into my driveway and hit the brakes hard. Karen's BMW sat there like a big white "screw you" sign. I knocked on her door, polite as church on Sunday. "Excuse me, ma'am, I think you parked in the wrong driveway." She looked me up and down like I was something stuck to her designer shoe. "Oh, that old thing? I assumed it was communal space. This is a nice neighborhood." The way she said nice while eyeing my work clothes told me everything. "Ma'am, I need access for my work truck. I get emergency calls." Her perfectly drawn eyebrows shot up. "Well, maybe you should have thought about that before moving here. Perhaps you could park that commercial vehicle somewhere less visible. We do try to maintain property values." The door clicked shut with the sound of a judge's gavel, and I stood there breathing in the lingering scent of her expensive perfume that seemed to mark her territory like a territorial cat. That's when I realized this wasn't about parking. This was about Karen needing to control everything in her line of sight, and my blue-collar existence was a stain on her perfect picture. Over the next month, the pattern became clear as clockwork. Karen would park in my driveway temporarily during her wine gatherings, always when I was at work, always positioned to trap me completely when I got home. She'd leave these passive-aggressive sticky notes about being considerate and maintaining neighborhood standards while her own guests' cars would spill onto the street like she owned the whole block. Meanwhile, she'd ambush neighbors at their mailboxes, casually mentioning how my commercial vehicle was affecting property values and bringing down the aesthetic. Most people would just nod and escape inside because everyone knew the golden rule of suburban survival. Don't poke the HOA dragon, even when it's an unofficial one. Mrs. Kowalski, the sweet 70-year-old retired teacher next door, would give me sympathetic looks over her fence but never said a word. The young Johnson couple practically sprinted to their front door whenever Karen appeared in her driveway. Even our mailman started speed-walking past her house like he was dodging sniper fire. I should have recognized the signs from my years fixing engines. When one part starts overheating, it's going to blow, eventually. Karen Whitmore had been running hot for years, systematically terrorizing anyone who didn't fit her vision of suburban perfection. But this mechanic was about to teach her something about pressure systems and what happens when you push the wrong guy too far. 3 weeks later, Karen decided to test just how far she could push me. I'd been working a brutal shift fixing the entire school bus fleet, 12 hours of wrestling with diesel engines and hydraulic systems that fought me every bolt of the way. My back felt like someone had worked it over with a crowbar, and the smell of motor oil was so deep in my skin I could taste it. I turned onto our street at 9 p.m., already dreaming of a cold beer, when I saw the ambush. Not just Karen's BMW this time. Her car plus 2 guest vehicles had turned my driveway into their personal parking lot. They'd blocked not just my driveway, but positioned themselves so I couldn't even reach my mailbox, like they'd deliberately tried to claim as much of my property as possible. Before I could even process what I was seeing, Karen emerged from her front door wearing a cocktail dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. She had this fake, surprised expression painted on her face like she'd been practicing in the mirror. "Oh, Marcus, didn't expect you back so early." Early? It was past 9 on a weeknight. My friend Stephanie had an absolute emergency and needed somewhere to park just for tonight. You understand, right? The way she said emergency while holding a wine glass told me everything about her definition of crisis. Too tired to fight, I parked on the street and dragged myself inside, the sound of their laughter echoing through my thin walls like mockery. The next morning, I woke up to a bright orange parking ticket tucked under my windchipper, $75 for violating street cleaning regulations. That's when Karen's strategy became crystal clear. She wasn't just stealing my parking spot, she was actively costing me money for the privilege of being inconvenienced. That weekend, instead of sleeping in like a normal person, I spent my Saturday morning at the public library researching property law. Turned out my old friend Jerry from high school had gone through something similar with his neighbor in Cleveland, and he'd mentioned once that driveways count as private property just like your living room. Jerry was right. In Ohio, parking there without permission is straight-up trespassing. I downloaded a surveyor app on my phone and took photos of the exact property lines, documenting everything with timestamps like I was building a case file. Monday evening, I called the non-emergency police line and filed a formal complaint. The officer who showed up was polite enough, but I could tell he'd rather be dealing with real crime than neighbor disputes. Karen must have been watching from her window because she appeared instantly, like a spider sensing vibrations in her web. "Officer, thank goodness you're here. He's been so hostile since moving in. I'm actually concerned for my safety." She was good, I'll give her that. Her voice had this tremor that would have fooled anyone who hadn't seen her steamroll 3 different neighbors over lawn height regulations. The cop's eyes shifted to my work truck parked legally in my own driveway. "Ma'am, this appears to be a residential code issue. Doesn't this commercial vehicle violate neighborhood regulations?" Karen's face lit up like she'd just hit the lottery. "That's exactly what I've been trying to explain. This isn't the kind of neighborhood for that type of activity." The officer issued warnings to both of us, me for having a commercial vehicle in a residential area, and Karen for parking disputes. But his body language made it clear he thought I was the problem. As he was leaving, I overheard Karen casually mention that her husband Leonard was a managing partner at Whitmore Burke & Associates. The name clicked immediately. I'd seen it on half the billboards around town, and my divorce lawyer had mentioned they handle most of the city's legal work. Suddenly, the officer's reluctance made perfect sense. My buddy Jerry had warned me about this too. Cops won't tow from private property unless the owner is right there filing the complaint in person, and even then, they'll look for any excuse to avoid paperwork when lawyers are involved. After the cruiser pulled away, the neighborhood felt different. Karen had played her cards perfectly, painting me as the aggressive newcomer, while positioning herself as the concerned citizen protecting property values. I noticed curtains twitching when I came home from work. Mrs. Kowalski stopped making eye contact over the fence. The Johnson couple practically sprinted from their car to their front door whenever they saw me outside. But Karen had made one crucial mistake. During her performance for the police officer, she'd let slip her husband's position and firm name. A quick Google search that night revealed Leonard Whitmore wasn't just any lawyer. He was up for senior partner this year, and any scandal involving his family could derail a career he'd spent 20 years building. His firm's client list read like a who's who of city government. As I sat in my kitchen that night, the sound of wine glasses clinking and fake laughter drifting over from Karen's deck, I realized this wasn't going to end with polite conversations and proper channels. Karen had been playing this game for years, but she just made the mistake of targeting someone who understood that every machine has a breaking point. Karen's next move came 2 weeks later, and it was so bold I almost had to admire her creativity. I was replacing brake pads on Mrs. Henderson's minivan when my phone rang. "Marcus, you need to get home right now," came Mrs. Kowalski's worried voice. "There's some kind of utility situation, and that woman is in your driveway again." I drove home to find Karen's BMW parked in my usual spot, but this time she'd gotten clever. A bright orange sign in her window read "Utility Access Vehicle" in official-looking letters. She was standing next to her car with a clipboard, wearing a hard hat that still had the Home Depot sticker on it, talking to poor Mrs. Kowalski like she was conducting some kind of inspection. "Oh, Marcus!" Karen called out with theatrical relief. "Perfect timing. The gas company needs emergency access through your driveway to check the meters. Safety issue. Could be a leak." She waved a folder of official-looking papers. "I volunteered to coordinate since I was home today." The whole setup looked legitimate enough to fool most people. Karen had even gone so far as to wear work boots, probably the first time those designer feet had touched anything more rugged than marble tile. But something about her performance felt off, like watching a soap opera actress try to play a construction worker. "Which gas company?" I asked, pulling out my phone. Karen's confident smile flickered for just a second. "Columbia Gas, of course. They said it would only take a few hours." I called Columbia Gas right there on the spot. After 10 minutes on hold listening to their terrible music, a dispatcher confirmed what I suspected. No scheduled work in our area, no emergency calls, no reason for any utility vehicle to be in my driveway. When I told Karen this, she had the audacity to suggest I'd called the wrong department and maybe I should let the professionals handle it. That weekend, I installed a motion-activated camera aimed at my driveway. My cousin Rick works security and had told me once that most people won't mess with you if they know they're being recorded. The camera was positioned entirely on my property, angled carefully to capture my driveway without peering into Karen's windows, something Rick had drilled into me about staying on the right side of privacy laws. Karen discovered the camera Monday morning and went nuclear. She marched over while I was loading my truck for work, pointing at the camera like it was a weapon of mass destruction. "That thing is an invasion of my privacy. You can't record me on my own property." "It's only recording my driveway," I explained calmly. "Same as a doorbell camera. I'm calling the city about surveillance harassment." She stormed back to her house, heels clicking against the pavement like an angry woodpecker. True to her word, Karen filed a complaint with the city about unauthorized surveillance and organized another one of her neighborhood meetings, this time specifically excluding me. I watched through my kitchen window as she held court on her back deck, gesturing dramatically toward my house while her wine club nodded along like a jury of Karens. But here's the thing about cameras. They don't lie. That Tuesday night, my motion alerts went off around 11 p.m. I checked the footage and couldn't believe what I was seeing. Karen, dressed in dark clothes like some suburban ninja, had crept over to my truck with what looked like her car keys. The audio picked up everything, her practicing fake tears, muttering, "He's so aggressive," to herself, then deliberately scratching a long line down the side of my truck. The next morning, she called the police to report that I'd been intimidating her and claimed to have witnessed me acting erratically near her property. When Officer Martinez arrived, different cop this time, Karen put on the same victim performance, complete with trembling voice and worried glances toward my house. "I just don't feel safe anymore," she told him, dabbing at dry eyes with a tissue. "Last night I heard him outside yelling, and this morning I found damage to my fence. I think he's escalating." I handed Officer Martinez my phone with the video queued up. We watched together as Karen's late-night performance played out in crystal-clear HD. The fake practice session, the deliberate vandalism, even her muttering threats under her breath. Officer Martinez looked from the phone to Karen, who had gone pale as her BMW. "Ma'am, this appears to show you vandalizing Mr. Thompson's vehicle." Karen sputtered something about edited footage and deep fakes, but the timestamp and metadata were right there. The officer took down the information for a formal report while Karen retreated to her house, probably already calling Leonard's law firm. That night, as I filed an insurance claim with video evidence attached, I realized Karen had just handed me the best gift possible. Documented proof that she was willing to lie to police and commit actual crimes to get her way. The woman who'd spent months painting me as the neighborhood threat had just revealed herself as exactly what she'd been accusing me of being. Karen's third move was her most calculated yet, and it started with the smell of two-stroke engine exhaust drifting across my yard on a crisp November morning. Her landscaper Pete was working unusually close to my property line, the angry whine of his hedge trimmer more aggressive than usual, like he was trying to cut through steel instead of shrubs. I was rebuilding a carburetor in my garage when the crash happened. a metallic clang that made me drop my wrench. Through the open garage door, I watched my mailbox topple over like a felled tree, the post bent at a sickening angle that screamed, "Expensive repair." Pete stood frozen next to his trimmer, looking like a kid who'd just broken his mother's favorite vase. Before I could even process what happened, Karen materialized on her front porch wearing that practiced expression of concern she'd perfected over the years. "Oh my goodness, Marcus, I'm so sorry about this accident. Pete feels absolutely terrible." Pete, meanwhile, was frantically gathering his equipment with the desperation of someone planning a quick escape. The acrid smell of his equipment exhaust mixed with Karen's expensive perfume created this bizarre cocktail of suburban warfare. "I was thinking we could split the cost of repairs," Karen continued, examining her perfect manicure. "Since technically your mailbox was positioned pretty close to the property line, really, it's nobody's fault." The way she emphasized "split the cost" while avoiding eye contact told me everything I needed to know about this accident. "That's okay," I said, already pulling out my phone. "Insurance will handle it." Her face shifted slightly, like a mask slipping. "Oh, you don't want to get insurance involved over something so minor. That could affect both our rates. I really think we should handle this privately between neighbors." I took photos from every angle while Pete loaded his truck faster than emergency responders. Karen's eagerness to avoid official documentation reminded me of something my ex-wife's divorce lawyer had taught me the hard way. When someone desperately wants to keep things unofficial, they're usually planning to screw you officially. 3 days later, my insurance agent called with news that made my coffee taste bitter. Karen had filed a claim against my homeowner's policy, claiming my improperly positioned mailbox had damaged Pete's equipment and created a safety hazard that reduced her property value. She was seeking $200 for equipment repair and aesthetic impact. Apparently, my crooked mailbox was an eyesore that threatened the entire neighborhood's real estate prospects. That weekend, I spent 8 hours at the county clerk's office digging through dusty property records like an archaeological expedition. The musty smell of old files and the fluorescent lighting gave me a headache, but what I found was worth every minute. Detailed documentation from the original 1987 property survey, complete with photos showing my mailbox in the exact same position for 15 years. The previous owner had been the kind of meticulous record keeper who documented everything down to the color of paint used on the front door. My insurance adjuster, Patricia, was a sharp-eyed woman who'd clearly survived enough neighbor wars to recognize Karen's tactics immediately. She took one look at the historical documentation, compared it to Karen's claim, and started using words like fraudulent filing and potential criminal charges that made my entire week brighter. But Karen wasn't finished. While I was drowning in paperwork, she'd launched her most ambitious campaign yet, a formal petition to City Council about commercial vehicles destroying residential character. She'd somehow collected 8 signatures, mostly from neighbors who probably thought they were signing a birthday card. The petition demanded my work truck be banned from residential areas, claiming it violated zoning codes and lowered property values throughout the subdivision. The masterstroke was Karen scheduling her presentation for the next city council meeting and inviting a reporter from the Millbrook Gazette. Only later did I learn this reporter was her old Tri-Delta sorority sister, a detail Mrs. Kowalski mentioned after spotting them giggling over lattes while planning their coordinated attack on the neighborhood's resident working-class villain. That evening, my doorbell rang. Dave Rodriguez stood on my porch holding a manila folder, his military bearing obvious even in civilian clothes. He'd moved across the street the month before, and something about his steady gaze suggested he'd dealt with bigger problems than suburban terrorists. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Think you should see this." What Dave showed me changed the entire game. He'd been quietly documenting Karen's behavior since moving in, and his contacts in city planning had shared some fascinating information. Karen's decorative fence, the one she used to establish her territorial boundaries, had been encroaching on city right-of-way for 8 years. The violation carried a $500 monthly fine, retroactive to installation. Karen potentially owed $48,000 to the city, but the violation had never been reported because Leonard's firm handled most municipal legal work. As I stared at the documentation spread across my kitchen table, the sound of Karen's wine party drifting through the walls, I realized I'd been playing defense when I should have been playing offense. What Dave revealed that night sitting at my kitchen table, the smell of leftover coffee mixing with the musty scent of old documents, changed everything I thought I knew about Karen Whitmore. The manila folder he'd brought wasn't just about fence violations. It was a complete dossier on suburban terrorism disguised as neighborhood improvement. "This isn't just about you," Dave said, spreading photos across my table like evidence at a murder trial. The papers told a story that made my blood run cold. 3 families had fled our street in 5 years, all following the exact same pattern I was living through. Karen's been running this playbook since 2018. Mrs. Chen, the sweet librarian who used to live 2 houses down, had made the mistake of planting tomatoes in her front yard. Karen deemed it unsightly and launched a systematic destruction campaign. Fake code violations, fraudulent insurance claims, social isolation until the 70-year-old woman couldn't afford to fight anymore. She'd sold at a loss and moved to assisted care, spending her retirement savings on legal fees defending against Karen's lies. The Martinez family's teenage son had started mowing lawns to save for college. Karen called immigration services with false tips, filed noise complaints for a push mower used only on weekends, and spread rumors about commercial activity until the family went bankrupt fighting legal battles. The kid gave up his college fund to help his parents survive. Every single buyer was represented by Leonard's firm, Dave said, his finger tracing the connection that made my stomach drop. Classic conflict of interest. But who's going to report it when you're broken? The revelation hit me like a wrench to the skull. This wasn't neighbor drama. This was systematic ethnic and economic cleansing disguised as maintaining property values. Karen would target anyone who didn't fit her suburban fantasy, then use Leonard's legal machine to grind them down until they disappeared. The replacement families were always wealthy, white professionals who could afford Karen's standards and wouldn't dare challenge her authority. Dave pulled out the nuclear option, a copy of the original 1987 easement agreement for our subdivision. The crisp sound of papers rustling seemed unnaturally loud in my quiet kitchen. Karen's fence isn't just violating city property, it's blocking utility access for 3 houses. The city should have forced removal years ago, but Leonard's firm handles municipal contracts. How long has this been going on? I asked, though I already knew the answer would make me sick. Thomas Chen, Mrs. Chen's grandson, works as a paralegal. He's been building a RICO case for 3 years. Conspiracy to use legal connections for personal gain while systematically harassing law-abiding citizens. Your documentation might be the final piece he needs. The weight of it crushed down on me like a collapsed engine block. I hadn't just moved next to a difficult neighbor. I'd stumbled into the middle of a years-long criminal conspiracy that had destroyed multiple families. Karen's wine parties weren't social gatherings. They were victory celebrations after each successful extraction of undesirable neighbors. Why didn't anyone fight back? I asked. Dave's smile was bitter as black coffee. Hard to fight City Hall when your neighbor's husband is City Hall. Most people don't have the resources to take on a law firm that handles half the city's legal work. As I stared at the evidence spread across my kitchen table, the sound of Karen's latest wine party drifting through the walls like the soundtrack to a crime scene, I realized I'd been playing the wrong game entirely. This wasn't about parking spaces or property lines. This was about stopping a predator who'd been systematically destroying lives for profit, protected by a legal shield most people couldn't afford to penetrate. But Karen had made one crucial mistake. She'd targeted a mechanic who understood that every machine has a breaking point, and I was about to find hers. The next morning, Dave introduced me to Thomas Chen over coffee at Mel's Diner, where the smell of bacon grease and bitter coffee mixed with the sweet taste of incoming revenge. Thomas was maybe 30, wire-rimmed glasses, with the quiet intensity of someone who'd spent years sharpening a very specific knife. When he spread his folder across the table between our plates of congealed eggs, I realized we weren't just planning neighborhood justice, we were joining a war that had been brewing for 3 years. "I've been waiting for someone exactly like you," Thomas said, his voice carrying the controlled fury of a man who'd watched his grandmother cry herself to sleep in assisted care. Someone Karen can't immediately destroy with her usual playbook. His Karen files looked like something from a detective show. Photos, timelines, financial records, all documenting a suburban crime spree disguised as community improvement. Our alliance clicked together like perfectly machined parts. Dave brought military precision and contacts throughout city government. Thomas had legal expertise and the burning motivation of someone seeking justice for family. Mrs. Kowalski, God bless her, had been secretly documenting Karen's fence violation for 2 years with photos that could nail down the exact timeline of encroachment. Even the terrified Johnson couple agreed to testify once Thomas explained that federal whistleblower protection trumps neighborhood social pressure. Thomas outlined our battle plan with the methodical precision of someone who'd been planning this takedown since Karen destroyed his family. 3 simultaneous strikes. File the easement violation for immediate financial pressure, document harassment patterns for a restraining order, and report insurance fraud to trigger criminal investigation. The beauty was coordination, multiple agencies investigating simultaneously, making it impossible for Leonard's firm to quietly kill complaints. Dave taught me the art of bulletproof documentation while we worked in my garage, the familiar smell of motor oil mixing with his military-grade paranoia about proper evidence protocols. Every photo needed GPS coordinates and timestamps. Every conversation had to be legally recorded. Thank God Ohio allows one-party consent recording. Every complaint filed in triplicate across different agencies to create an unstoppable paper trail. Here's what my buddy Jerry from the divorce taught me that most people never learn. Lawyers fear proper documentation more than courtroom drama. A licensed surveyor's report beats legal arguments. Email harassment creates federal mail fraud liability that state prosecutors love pursuing. Insurance fraud investigations run automatically once triggered. Even connected lawyers can't stop them. The trick is hitting multiple pressure points simultaneously until the whole system collapses. But our nuclear option was pure psychological warfare disguised as property improvement. The automatic boom gate would cost $20,400 of my overtime savings. But Dave found a contractor who'd been harassed by Karen at another job site and was practically volunteering for revenge duty. The gate would be completely legal, entirely on my surveyed property, professionally installed with proper permits filed in advance. Karen would wake up one morning to discover she could never access my driveway again, even when I wasn't home. The installation had to happen overnight like a military operation. Our contractor Mike had dealt with Karen's aesthetic standards complaints at 3 different job sites and understood the assignment. He'd arrive at midnight with crew and equipment, work through the night, and have everything operational by dawn. All permits filed the day before, making it impossible for Karen to claim violations or force removal. Thomas coordinated with Karen's other victims like a prosecutor building a racketeering case. The Martinez family in Akron had kept every false immigration complaint. Mrs. Chen's assisted living facility documented the stress-related health problems that forced her sale. The Henderson family had Karen's fake noise violations about their kid's basketball hoop. 3 families, same pattern, same legal representation for the buyers. Federal conspiracy charges practically wrote themselves. Community preparation required surgical precision. Mrs. Kowalski would speak at city council with 30 years of neighborhood credibility backing her testimony. Dave quietly recruited neighbors Karen hadn't completely terrorized, explaining that federal witness protection meant immunity from her retaliation. We even arranged anonymous tips to local media about Leonard's conflict of interest cases. Corruption stories sell newspapers better than Karen's suburban drama. The beauty of our plan was simplicity wrapped in overwhelming complexity. Karen had spent years using legal intimidation because most people can't afford to fight lawyers. But federal conspiracy charges level the playing field. The government prosecutes for free, and conviction rates run over 90% when the evidence is solid. Thomas had been building that evidence for 3 years, waiting for the right moment to pull the trigger. As we finalized details in my garage, the distant sound of Karen's wine party mixing with the rhythmic clicking of Dave's pen against his clipboard, I felt something I hadn't experienced since the divorce settlement, the anticipation of total victory. Karen had built her suburban kingdom by systematically destroying anyone who challenged her authority, protected by legal connections and neighbor intimidation. But she'd made the fatal mistake of targeting a mechanic who understood pressure systems, supported by a veteran who knew tactical planning and a paralegal with 3 years of legal ammunition. The boom gate would announce our declaration of war, but the real battle would be fought in courtrooms and city council chambers, where Karen's wine party influence meant nothing against federal prosecutors. Karen's meltdown started at exactly 6:47 a.m. Wednesday morning with a shriek that could shatter windshields. I was sipping coffee in my kitchen when the sound pierced through the walls, pure, undiluted rage mixed with disbelief. Through my window, I watched her standing in her silk robe and designer slippers, pointing at my new boom gate like it had just declared war on her entire bloodline. The gate was beautiful, gleaming white metal spanning my driveway entrance, controlled by a smartphone app that made my mechanic's heart sing. The electronic beep as it opened for my work truck seemed to trigger something primal in Karen's perfectly organized brain. Her mouth moved like she was screaming, but no sound came out. Classic suburban apoplexy. But Karen was nothing if not adaptable. By afternoon, she'd launched a digital warfare campaign that would have impressed military strategists. Facebook posts appeared in every neighborhood group within a 5-mile radius, written in that breathless, concerned mother tone that suburban women perfect like a martial art. Urgent. Escalating safety concerns from new resident. Families with small children need to be aware of potential threats. She'd even created fake Nextdoor profiles, obvious because they all used the same robotic language about community standards and family safety that sounded like it came from a HOA manual translated through Google. Karen was spending her wine-soaked afternoons commenting on her own posts with multiple fake accounts, creating the illusion that half the neighborhood was terrified of the unstable veteran with surveillance equipment next door. The smell of desperation was stronger than her usual expensive perfume. Her masterstroke was organizing a community safety meeting at the local community center, complete with professionally printed flyers about protecting our families from neighborhood threats. She'd contacted Channel 7 News about a dangerous neighbor situation requiring immediate community response. The reporter who arrived was Jessica Morrison, Karen's old Tri-Delta sorority sister, complete with camera crew and a predetermined narrative about suburban security under siege. What Karen didn't know was that every aspect of my boomgate installation had been meticulously documented and legally bulletproof. Permits filed weeks in advance, measurements verified by licensed surveyors, installation completed according to city codes by bonded contractors. When Channel 7 arrived expecting to film a story about illegal property obstruction, they found a textbook example of proper home security improvement. Jessica's interview with me went nothing like Karen's fever dreams. Instead of the unhinged neighbor she'd described, the camera captured a calm, articulate working man explaining basic property rights while demonstrating professionally installed equipment. "The gate controls access to my private driveway," I explained, the boom lifting smoothly as my truck approached. "Same legal principle as a garage door or privacy fence." Karen's on-camera performance, however, became instant local legend. When Jessica asked for specific safety concerns, Karen launched into a rambling tirade about inappropriate surveillance and commercial vehicle violations, while her voice climbed to frequencies that probably bothered neighborhood dogs. The footage of her actually kicking my boom gate while shrieking about property values went viral in local Facebook groups within hours. Suddenly, neighbors who'd been terrified to speak up started sharing their own Karen horror stories in the comments. Mrs. Patterson revealed Karen's complaints about her kids' sidewalk chalk art. The Rodriguezes admitted Karen had called code enforcement about their tomato plants. Even Mr. Kim confessed Karen had suggested his wind chimes were culturally inappropriate for American neighborhoods. But Karen's desperation peaked Thursday night at 11:47 p.m., captured in high definition by my motion-activated cameras. A figure in dark clothing crept across my driveway carrying what looked like tools, while another person watched from Karen's upstairs window. The night vision footage revealed Karen's cousin Ricky, whom I recognized from previous family gatherings, attempting to jam my boom gate mechanism with a screwdriver. The audio was devastating. "Just make it look like a malfunction," Karen's voice hissed through her bedroom window. "If it's broken, the city will force removal." Ricky fumbled with the motor housing, trying to disable the system while Karen provided lookout services from her command post. What they didn't know was that the gate's tamper detection had already sent alerts to my phone. I watched their amateur sabotage attempt in real time from my bedroom, recording backup footage while their conspiracy unfolded in crystal clear detail. When Ricky finally gave up and slunk back to Karen's house, I had enough evidence to file federal charges for attempted destruction of internet-connected devices, a cybercrime that carries serious prison time. Friday morning, I called Officer Martinez with video evidence of Karen's latest escalation. But the real bombshell went to Thomas Chen, who immediately recognized the federal implications. Tampering with internet-connected security systems crosses into cybercrime territory, carrying penalties that would make Leonard's law firm very nervous about their continued association with Karen's suburban terrorism campaign. As I watched Karen pace frantically in her driveway that morning, probably wondering why her sabotage had failed so spectacularly, I realized she'd just provided the final evidence Thomas needed for his federal conspiracy case. The sound of her heels clicking frantically against concrete was like a countdown timer to her own destruction. Karen's final gambit arrived with the desperation of a cornered animal. Leonard had returned from his business trip to discover his perfect world collapsing. Insurance fraud investigations, easement violations, and federal conspiracy charges brewing like a perfect storm of career destruction. Through my kitchen window, I watched him pace their driveway while reading legal documents, his voice carrying across the evening air in sharp, angry bursts. You need to fix this insanity before it destroys us both. Leonard's shout cut through the suburban quiet like a chainsaw. The smell of panic was stronger than Karen's usual expensive perfume. He'd finally done the math. Senior partner promotion versus wife's neighborhood terrorism campaign, and Karen was losing catastrophically. But Karen had crossed into full-blown delusion. Thursday morning, she appeared at my door wearing a business suit and the fake smile of a politician caught on camera. Marcus, I think we've gotten off on the wrong foot. I'd like to invite you to a special neighborhood gathering where we can resolve our differences like civilized people. The invitation reeked of trap, but I was curious enough to walk into whatever suburban execution she was planning. Saturday evening, the community center buzzed with nervous energy and the sour smell of fierce sweat mixed with cheap coffee. 15 neighbors sat arranged like a firing squad, with Karen commanding the front of the room, clutching a clipboard like a weapon. Her eyes had the glassy intensity of someone who'd spent the week mainlining wine and conspiracy theories. Thank you all for coming to address the escalating safety crisis in our community, Karen began, her voice carrying the authoritative tone of a cult leader addressing true believers. Recent incidents involving surveillance, harassment, and aggressive behavior have created an unsafe environment for our children. What followed was a masterclass in suburban psychological warfare. Karen had prepared a full PowerPoint presentation complete with enlarged photos of my work truck, security cameras, and boom gate, narrating each image like evidence in a murder trial. She'd spent the week coaching neighbors like a director preparing amateur actors for the performance of their lives. Mrs. Patterson nervously recited her lines about disturbing noise levels. The Johnsons mumbled about feeling threatened, with the conviction of hostages reading ransom demands. Even gentle Mr. Kim reluctantly shared that my surveillance equipment made him fear for his family's privacy. The words came out stilted and rehearsed, but Karen nodded approvingly at each coached testimony. Sometimes difficult decisions must be made to protect innocent families, Karen announced with the finality of a judge delivering a death sentence. She produced a petition with 23 signatures demanding my immediate removal from the neighborhood. The City Council will receive formal complaints about zoning violations and public safety threats that require emergency intervention. The whole performance was so perfectly orchestrated, so completely rigged, that I felt a grudging respect for her tactical brilliance. Years of practice had perfected this exact scenario: isolate the target, control the narrative, present overwhelming community opposition, then let legal machinery finish the destruction. But Karen had made one fatal miscalculation. What she didn't know was that Dave Rodriguez was recording everything from the back corner, documenting each coached lie for Thomas Chen's federal prosecutors. More importantly, 3 of her concerned neighbors were actually our allies, participating only to gather evidence of witness intimidation and conspiracy. When Karen opened the floor for final community input, I stood slowly, letting the silence stretch until you could hear the fluorescent lights crackling overhead. The manila folder in my hands seemed to glow under the harsh lighting. Before we continue this fascinating performance, I said, my voice cutting through the room like a blade, I think everyone should understand that federal prosecutors are watching. Karen's triumphant expression cracked like old paint. The color drained from her face as I continued. This meeting is being recorded as evidence in a RICO investigation involving conspiracy, fraud, and systematic harassment. Everyone who just lied under Karen's coaching has potentially committed federal crimes. The silence that followed was so complete it felt like the air had been sucked from the room. You could actually hear people's hearts beating faster, the rustle of clothing as they shifted nervously, the distant hum of traffic outside that suddenly seemed very far away. Mrs. Patterson, I said gently, did Karen threaten to report your home daycare unless you participated tonight? Her face crumpled as she nodded. Mr. Johnson, did she promise to drop complaints about your fence if you supported her petition? His wife grabbed his arm as he stammered an admission. One by one, Karen's carefully constructed coalition collapsed like dominoes. Neighbors who'd been terrorized into compliance suddenly found their voices, admitting they'd been coerced, threatened, or bribed into participation. The petition she'd waved like a victory flag became evidence of criminal conspiracy. Karen tried to maintain control, her voice rising to that glass-breaking pitch of pure panic. This is ridiculous. These people are lying. Marcus is obviously intimidating everyone. But her desperation only made the truth more obvious. As neighbors fled the community center like survivors escaping a disaster, Karen stood alone in the harsh fluorescent light, her perfect suburban kingdom crumbling around her like a house built on lies. The sound of car doors slamming in the parking lot was like gunshots announcing the end of her reign. She'd just handed federal prosecutors everything they needed to destroy her completely. The city council meeting on Tuesday night drew the largest crowd in Millbrook Heights history. Word had spread through Facebook groups like wildfire. The suburban showdown between Karen Whitmore and the mechanic who dared fight back was finally going nuclear. The council chamber buzzed with the electric anticipation of a crowd gathering for a public execution, the smell of burnt coffee and nervous sweat thick enough to cut with a knife. Karen arrived like royalty making a grand entrance, designer power suit gleaming under the fluorescent lights, flanked by Leonard and two stone-faced associates from his law firm. Her confident stride and camera-ready smile suggested she still believed her legal connections could salvage this disaster. She wheeled in a professional presentation setup complete with poster boards, charts, and enough documentation to choke a courthouse. I showed up in my cleanest work shirt carrying a simple manila folder, looking like David approaching Goliath with nothing but a slingshot. Dave Rodriguez and Thomas Chen flanked me like bodyguards, while Mrs. Kowalski sat front row center in her Sunday best, probably the first city council meeting she'd attended since the Reagan administration. Channel 7 had positioned cameras for maximum drama, with Jessica Morrison looking like she'd rather be covering literally any other story on Earth. Council Chairman Martinez called for citizen complaints, and Karen approached the podium like a general addressing her troops. The sharp click of her heels against tile echoed through the chamber with military precision. "Thank you for allowing me to address these critical community safety concerns," she began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never been told no in her entire privileged life. Karen's presentation was suburban manipulation elevated to art form. Her PowerPoint painted me as a dangerous outsider who'd invaded peaceful Millbrook Heights with commercial vehicles, surveillance equipment, and threatening behavior toward families. She presented her petition with 23 signatures, tearful testimonials from concerned mothers, and official-looking documentation of my supposed violations. Property values have plummeted since this individual moved into our family-oriented community, Karen declared with the passion of someone defending the motherland. Children can no longer play safely in their own yards. We're requesting immediate city intervention to protect innocent families from this escalating threat. The applause from her supporters echoed through the chamber, and Karen basked in it like a politician at a victory rally. She'd successfully painted herself as a heroic mother protecting neighborhood children from a blue-collar monster. It was Oscar-worthy performance art, if Oscars were awarded for suburban terrorism. When my turn came, I walked to the podium slowly, letting the silence stretch until you could hear people's heartbeats. The rustle of papers opening seemed to echo like thunder. "Thank you, Chairman Martinez. I have something Ms. Whitmore doesn't expect. The truth." The projector screen blazed to life with crystal-clear security footage. The packed chamber watched in dead silence as Karen trespassed in my driveway, vandalized my truck with her keys, coached her cousin in nighttime sabotage, and organized the community meeting where she terrorized neighbors into false testimony. Each video clip built an undeniable mountain of evidence that reduced Karen's heroic narrative to smoking ruins. "But that's not all," I continued, my voice cutting through the stunned silence like a blade. "Ms. Whitmore has been systematically destroying families in this neighborhood for 8 years, protected by her husband's legal connections. Her decorative fence violates city easement law, and she owes $48,000 in retroactive fines that were never collected because Leonard's firm handles city legal work." Karen's confident mask shattered like glass hitting concrete. She tried to interrupt, stammering about edited footage and conspiracy, but Thomas Chen was already approaching with federal documentation that made the crowd lean forward in anticipation. "Members of the council and citizens of Millbrook Heights," Thomas announced with prosecutorial gravity, "I represent multiple families who've been victims of what federal investigators have classified as a RICO conspiracy involving fraud, harassment, and systematic abuse of legal process. Ms. Whitmore and her husband are subjects of an active federal investigation for racketeering." The chamber exploded in shocked gasps and urgent whispers. Karen's face went white as fresh snow while Leonard's associates shuffled papers frantically and avoided all eye contact. Leonard himself had vanished into his phone, probably speed-dialing crisis management specialists. Chairman Martinez gavelled desperately for order as Karen made one final desperate attempt to regain control. "This is all lies," she shrieked, her voice climbing to frequencies that made people cover their ears. "Marcus has obviously manipulated everything to destroy my reputation. This is a conspiracy. I stepped back to the microphone for my mic drop moment. Karen, the only conspiracy here is the one you've been running for 8 years. The difference is, mine has evidence. The silence that followed was so complete you could hear the fluorescent lights humming. Karen stood frozen at the podium, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, completely speechless for the first time in her entitled life. The woman who'd terrorized an entire neighborhood with her voice had finally been struck absolutely, completely, devastatingly mute. The sweet taste of justice came faster than I expected. Within 48 hours of Karen's public meltdown, city planning issued violation notices requiring immediate fence removal and $48,000 in retroactive fines. The sound of Karen's panicked phone calls to Leonard's firm carried across the yards like music to my ears. Apparently, even well-connected lawyers can't make federal investigations disappear. The restraining order arrived Friday morning with the satisfying weight of legal finality. Karen was now legally prohibited from entering my property, filing false complaints, or even speaking to me directly. Leonard filed for separation Monday morning, probably hoping to salvage his career by cutting ties with his suburban terrorist wife. Their for sale sign went up 2 weeks later, and the smell of desperation was stronger than Karen's usual expensive perfume. But the real victory was watching our neighborhood transform from Karen's personal fiefdom back into an actual community where people smiled instead of cowered. Mrs. Kowalski organized our first legitimate Homeowners Association, with Dave Rodriguez elected president by neighbors who finally felt safe to participate. The Johnson couple installed security cameras without fear of Karen's retaliation. Mr. Kim's wind chimes now played their gentle melodies without threats about cultural appropriateness. My business exploded overnight thanks to viral video coverage that reached 3 million views. Turns out, half of Ohio had their own Karen stories, and everyone wanted their cars fixed by the mechanic who'd finally fought back and won. The sound of my shop phone ringing constantly was better than any victory song. I hired 2 mechanics within a month and started shopping for a larger garage to handle the overflow. The social good that emerged from our victory felt better than any personal revenge. Dave and I launched the Neighborhood Justice Fund using donations that poured in from viewers who'd lived their own suburban nightmares. We've provided legal assistance to 12 families fighting HOA tyrants and suburban terrorists who thought legal connections made them untouchable. Watching other Karens get their comeuppance never gets old. We partnered with legal aid to offer free property surveys, because proper boundaries are your first defense against neighbor warfare. The fund also provides trade school scholarships for kids from single-parent homes. Working-class families deserve the same opportunities as trust fund babies who think blue-collar work is beneath them. Mrs. Chen's return visit made grown men cry. 3 generations of her family gathered in the front yard where her vegetable garden once thrived, sharing stories and healing wounds that Karen's cruelty had carved deep. The current homeowners invited Mrs. Chen to plant a memorial garden in the exact same spot, and now her tomatoes grow again, where Karen once saw only threats to property values. The smell of fresh soil and new growth replaced years of fear and isolation. Leonard's law firm quietly settled federal charges by paying 7-figure fines and accepting oversight that prevents future conflicts of interest. Leonard now works as a junior associate 3 counties away, his partnership dreams nuked by his wife's suburban terrorism campaign. Sometimes justice has perfect symmetry. Karen fled to a gated community in Florida where, ironically, she's now being terrorized by an even more entitled HOA president who makes her old tactics look amateur. According to social media reports, she's getting a taste of her own medicine from someone with even deeper pockets and meaner lawyers. The cosmic karma is so perfect it feels scripted. My boom gate still operates flawlessly after 10 months, the electronic beep serving as a daily victory bell every time I come home. 0 trespassing incidents since installation, and that satisfying mechanical hum has become the sound of property rights properly defended. Sometimes I open and close it just to hear the sweet sound of boundaries being respected. Our second annual Boomgate Day block party is next weekend, celebrating the anniversary of Karen's defeat while raising funds for families fighting their own suburban bullies. Half the county requested invitations, and we're expecting the largest community gathering in Millbrook Heights history. Mrs. Kowalski's making her legendary potato salad, Dave's handling barbecue duties, and I'm giving the keynote speech about ordinary people fighting back. But the real celebration happens every evening when I drive home to a neighborhood where kids play without fear. where people wave instead of hide, and where bullies learned that working-class folks can fight back and win when they organize and document everything. The smell of dinner cooking in peaceful homes, the sound of children laughing in yards, the sight of neighbors actually talking to each other. That's what victory looks like when good people refuse to be intimidated. Share your wildest HOA horror story in the comments below. The most outrageous one gets featured in next week's Karen Stories episode. And smash that subscribe button with notifications on, because we're exposing the fake contractor scam that's targeting neighborhoods exactly like yours right now.